have you here today for the International Coaching Community webinar series. Today you have me presenting. I am Raechel Forward. I'm an ICC trainer and coach from New Zealand. Today I am thrilled to be able to have a chat through and discuss attention to teamwork. So those of you who are the team coaches in the room or are interested in doing more team coaching, today we're going to explore conflict in teams and how we can harness team conflict into something that we can leverage for performance or collaboration in teams. So hopefully you can all see that I have some slides here, so not too many, but some things that we can look at and sort of think about the framework we might like to use as coaches, and also some interventions that we can use in some of our team coaching sessions. So let us begin. Let's talk about conflict. I mean, really, no one really likes it, do they? But if you've ever worked in a team, you know that it's unavoidable. So the good news is it doesn't have to be a bad thing. In fact, when handled well, conflict can spark fresh ideas and push teams to think differently and even strengthen the relationships within those teams. So this webinar is all about shifting our perspective on team conflict, both as team coaches and getting the team to do that, from something we fear or avoid to something we can harness for better collaboration. Today we'll explore why conflict happens, the different forms it takes, and most importantly, the practical strategies, just a couple of them, to turn workplace friction into a force for teamwork and innovation. So why does this matter for team coaches? As team coaches, our job isn't to play the referee or to shut down conflict. It's to help teams navigate it in a way that moves them forward. And conflict is a part of the deal when people work together. I mean, obviously, when you've got so many people in a room and different perspectives and different personalities and everything, we're going to have some conflict happening. So our role is to try and reframe that and recognise the conflict and work through it and around rather than around it by equipping people with practical tools to manage the disagreements. So we create conditions for psychological safety and done right, the conflict isn't just manageable, it's an opportunity for growth. So let's get a better understanding of what team conflict looks like. So I'm going to use Patrick Lencioni's conflict continuum as a great framework to help us. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's one of my favourite frameworks when it comes to understanding conflict. At one end of the spectrum, teams may experience artificial harmony, where conflict is definitely avoided at all costs. You may see people in this scenario withholding opinions, nodding in agreement, but you know that they're feeling differently inside. They're prioritising politeness over progress. Now, while this may feel comfortable, it leads to a lack of innovation, some poor decision making, and some unresolved tensions simmering beneath the surface. At the other extreme, teams experience destructive conflict. So while disagreements become personal, aggressive or toxic, this can look like constant tension, blaming or disengagement, where members shut down and even leave the team dynamic entirely. And I think as team coaches, this is what we can see a little bit of playing out in our teams. To be in the middle is the goal. Okay, so as team coaches, we want that ideal conflict point. And this is where we find healthy debate. It's where conflict is productive. And it's here that teams challenge ideas, not individuals, and work through disagreements openly and respectfully. So I think this is where teams thrive, as the different perspectives definitely lead to better decisions, stronger trust, and a true commitment to the outcomes of what is best for the team. So as you can see on this continuum here, which Patrick from the table group put together, it gives us a great framework to consider as team coaches. can we actually help a team to understand where they are? Okay, Alex, just from the ICC, can I get you to mute everyone, please, since we've got some noise coming into the room? Thank you very much.
So, acho que achei o microfone para ser ruim.
Excuse me, I'm just going to go and mute one, please. Okay, thank you. Our role as team coaches, obviously, is to foster that space in the middle there, so for better teamwork and problem solving. So teams, what we're going to do as team coaches is help the teams have courage, all of them to have courage to move away from that artificial harmony. And so, what we are noticing a lot of is that people are staying at that artificial harmony end. We want to try and get them to move to the middle. Why do they stay down there? Because they believe any move towards the right would cause immense pain. So this is why they cling to the left-hand side. So if we get the teams to move away from the left and towards the middle, that's where they can really reach that high performing stage. So this is where highly effective teams spend more time right up at that midline and occasionally going over it because they know that they can recover if they do. In fact, the scar tissue that gets built up and heals from when you recover from tipping over that point is stronger than tissue that's never been scarred before. It's like anything, isn't it, in life? So, how do we get people feeling comfortable about moving along that continuum? Well, it starts with understanding what types of conflict there actually are and what these teams are typically facing into. Okay. Not all conflict is created equal. In fact, understanding what type of conflict a team is dealing with is the first step in managing it effectively. So let's break it down into the 4 different types. The first is task conflict. This happens when there are disagreements about the actual work to be done. Maybe it's what the team should focus on, what takes priority, or the best approach to solving the problem. Handled well, task conflict can actually be a good thing. It brings about a diverse perspective, it challenges assumptions, maybe about the data or the information that the team has received, and leads to better decisions. The trick is to keep it productive and not personal. The next type of conflict is process conflict. This isn't about what needs to be done, but how we do it. So who's responsible for what and what's the best workflow? So how do we make things run smoothly? So although process conflict can be quite frustrating, especially when people feel their way is the only way, when teams take time to clarify the roles or the logistics of something and take care on what is the workflow, it leads to better efficiency and less friction down the track. The third type of conflict is status conflict. Now notice this is a little bit different, isn't it? This is about power and influence and recognition. And the conflict can arise when team members feel overlooked or undervalued, or even when there's some competition for leadership or decision making. So if left unchecked, this type of conflict can breed a bit of resentment. So that's why it's important as team coaches, we need to be quite mindful of creating an environment where everyone feels heard and valued. This is also a great opportunity for the team coach to get the leader of the team involved in making sure that everyone's heard and valued. Finally, there's relationship conflict, and this is the trickiest one. When personal differences or clashing personalities or underlying tensions are playing out and causing friction. So unlike the other types of conflict you can see there, relationship conflict is very rarely a productive one and can seriously harm the team cohesion if ignored. So this is where emotional intelligence and open communication can come into play. And the key is really recognising as the team coach when conflict is moved from being about the job that we do into something being personal. And we can step in before that escalates. So in looking at those 4 types of conflict as a team coach, when you recognise these, it helps the team to make sense of what's really happening. And when we name the conflict, we can take the mystery out of it and often the heat out of the conflict. So helping teams move from the frustration that they're feeling into problem solving. It also allows us as team coaches to stay objective and guide the discussions away from becoming personal and instead turning it into a tool for stronger collaboration. And you might see if you've got something playing out in the room between two people which appears to be personal conflict, you might like to actually start thinking about what is it that they're really talking about. Is it the task? Is it the process? Or in fact, it could be something about the status. You as a team coach can figure that out pretty quickly and then manage that in the moment. So now that we know what the different types of conflict look like, let's take a look now at a few strategies we can use as team coaches to manage and leverage it. We're going to take a look at two different ideas today. So the first one we're going to think about is measuring the current state of conflict in the team. Like all good coaching approaches, we always need to know what's happening right now. What's the current reality before we try and decide where are we going to move to? And the second one we'll look at is fostering a safe environment. Okay, so to start, let's have a look at 3 activities that would help teams assess their current state and their current approach to conflict, how they handle tension or even their awareness of it, and how they, maybe where they sit on something like a conflict spectrum. So as team coaches, it's a great idea to introduce the concept of conflict to the team as a starting point. I've done this several times. Even just bringing the word into the room can be quite interesting. So there's many ways to do this. Perhaps setting up a whole session around conflict itself. You can call it tension, you could call it conflict, you could call it heat. It doesn't matter. Use words that work for the team. So you can start with an informal conversation regarding the word itself, right through to introducing a framework such as the conflict continuum that we looked at earlier. Patrick Lencioni's work is well known, and most people will grasp onto that conflict and get a really good feel and understanding for it. So you can share that continuum as a large visual if you want. You could put it up on a whiteboard, you could use a PowerPoint. Sometimes I've used it on the floor, and that's a really great thing to do. It means that team members can walk around it, they can stand on it if they want. It's a really great kinesthetic exercise, getting the team up out of their chairs or away from the table, and having a good look at it. And you can get the team to share some examples of what behaviours look like in each zone. I think that's a really nice activity. And asking questions as the team coach. Where do you think you naturally operate most of the time? Nice, simple question, but try and get some discussion going. When I've done this myself as a team coach, I think it helps the team visualise their conflict patterns and understand that not all conflict is bad. And we get some real laughter going in the room when they're sharing examples of when they're clinging to the avoidance end. And why is that so? And I also love how it becomes quite a serious conversation when they start to talk about what it has felt like if they have been down the other end. So I think in doing this, you can create a neutral and structured way to talk about tension. So now the next thing to do is to allow the team to assess where they believe they're currently at and do that quite formally, like either, as I said, standing on the line if you've got it on the floor, or you could have individual team members mark with a sticky note or something on a board if that's what you're doing. So you can do polling or anonymous voting. It's all the same, really. The idea is to get the team really thinking about conflict in a way and owning where do we sit right now. You could ask some questions of them as well. So once they're talking about it and where they think they are, asking, what evidence do we have that supports our placement of where we think we are? And of course, a great question is, how does this impact our ability to collaborate? And exchange that word collaborate for any word you think fits with the scenario that you're talking about on the day. So as we always say with team coaching, you might have some frameworks there, but you've got to go in the moment and think about some different questions you might ask the team, or just listen to what they're saying as they're standing around the continuum or looking at it on the board. So sharing something like this and getting some voting going and some awareness going encourages that self-reflection, and that and it'll encourage the team to engage in conflict. They will see that it is just an abstract thing for them, and that it ensures everyone has their opinion shared about where they think the team is. So finally, get the team to decide the future state. As we said, we've got to measure where they currently are, have a discussion, and then start thinking about where would we like to be in the future, and just bring about some really good team coaching questions to get that discussion going. Things like, where would we ideally like to be on this continuum? And of course, what do we need to change to be there? You can get some groups breaking out. It'd be really nice. You could set them some questions off. You could do a keep, stop, start. You could ask them, what could we do more of, or what could we do less of as a team? I like the question, what would we see and hear if we were having healthy debate or constructive conflict in the team? There's just so many wonderful questions we can ask as team coaches, and I'm sure you have an inventory of questions you can use to put us alongside this little flow of activities I've given you there. So, measuring the current state, as you can see, use a framework, get some discussion going, ask some questions, and then perhaps get some actions as a result of what they have decided they'd like to do. So as team coaches, we can also help the team to continue progress and thrive by introducing some strong psychological safety foundations. We might have done the activities before. I'll just let some people into the room here. We might have done some activities, as we said before, around understanding conflict. But what we want to do is we want the team to actually start to understand, how do we help ourselves to lean into conflict by having some good ground rules. So have the team collectively design a set of ground fault rules for communication if you haven't already done that. Sometimes I also think if it has been done in the past, particularly if it's over a year old, it's quite a good idea to revisit that. So perhaps on a yearly or an 18-month rotating basis. Sometimes some of the ground rules might need to change, or you might have new people in the team who weren't part of setting those in the first place. So the team can discuss any questions that help establish their unique rules. So some to consider could be, what does respectful conversations or conversations look like for us? How will we handle those disagreements constructively? And what commitments can we make to ensure all voices are heard? I've done this just recently with a really wonderful team who is working together, and some people are feeling, because they are introverts, that they don't get to hear their voice. It was just such an amazing conversation for us to have. Rather than letting it continue to play out, we actually stopped the discussion and asked people who weren't getting the opportunity to have a say what was happening for them and how did they feel about that. So as a team coach, recognise what's happening in the room and ask some of these great questions and get the team to talk about it. So when a team co-creates these sorts of norms, they take ownership, and that makes it more likely to honour and reinforce the behaviours that would help them get to that midline. Another great approach is introduce the listen to understand rule. I'm sure some of you have probably heard this before, but and that lovely axiom that we must listen to understand before we input ourselves. So when together in meetings or discussions, team members can take an approach where they could paraphrase what they've heard first before jumping in immediately with an answer or a response. And of course, that may look like people saying, what I hear you saying is, and then that's checking for that understanding. So team coaches can also help the team to ask clarifying questions before sharing their perspective. So instead of making statements or just having a response, how do we get teams to actually help each other by asking better questions? So an approach like this prevents a reactive response all the time, and it reduces the misinterpretation that can so often play out in teams, which then of course causes that conflict space. I think it's also really important because it strengthens active listening amongst members of teams, and that can create an atmosphere of curiosity rather than defensiveness. So that listen to understand rule could be something that you could be quite interested in using. So finally, as team coaches, we can introduce some structured turn-taking methods. These can be things that you are particularly useful. This could be particularly useful for you if discussions tend to be dominated by those few voices. So there are some effective and nifty approaches that you can use. These can include, for example, the round robin approach. So if you're not familiar with that, that is where each team member speaks before anyone talks twice. So instead of just letting those dominant voices play out and bounce around in the team, you would actually, as a team coach, say, no, we're going to hear from everyone at least once before we allow the discussion to then become free-form. The talking object method, most of you will probably know this. This is the good old talking stick. So where only the person holding an object speaks. So the object can be anything, of course, as simple as a pen, but some, or a ball, or that talking stick. I love it though when I've done this before in some teams where they've actually gone off and got their own mascot. So they have a talking mascot that they take to all of their team meetings. And this is great. This encourages no interruptions. It encourages a good latency, which is when somebody stops speaking and the next person starts, because of course they've got to hand the object over and nobody can talk while that's being handed over. Just really calms the discussion down and gets the pace lowered so that we can have a bit more dialogue as opposed to debate. And the other one I think is quite good is the silent brainstorming first. I think this is a really good technique, particularly for highly intellectual teams or teams dealing with complex problems. So I find that people who have to think a lot, but they need some time to do that. So this is where everyone writes down their thoughts before the discussion happening, ensuring that some quieter voices or minds can get their thoughts down. And then you can actually share that with the person next to you. So a lovely little activity is to give them 5 minutes. They put some thoughts down to a question that you've put on the board. They might share that with the person next to them. You can even have another discussion in pairs. And then the other person may present that other person's idea or responding question to the room. So you can see how with these discussion techniques balance participation and reduce interruptions. Okay, so it's all about creating that space where everyone's input is valued. Now you can sort of run any one of these in whatever order you like, or one at a time, or you could do all 3 ideas if you want. Particularly if you're working with a team across several sessions, it's a really nice idea to introduce this stuff one at a time. So conflict in teams, just to sum up, conflict in teams isn't something to fear. It's actually something to work with. It's inevitable, but how it plays out depends on how we as team coaches guide it. Of course, our role isn't to eliminate conflict, but to help teams navigate it in a way that strengthens collaboration. So when we help teams to reframe conflict as an opportunity rather than a threat, we are increasing the likelihood of a high-performing team. So the real power of a team isn't the absence of conflict, it's the ability to turn it into progress. So getting people in and creating something that they are, their vision or what they're aspiring to do by using that conflict as a leverage. Okay, everyone, so that's some ideas and thoughts for you. Love to hear some questions. Let me just jump into the chat room to see if there's anything there. I see we've got some people from Tauranga. I'm actually in Tauranga today delivering this webinar, so how wonderful. and lovely to see people from around the world. Okay, so if anyone would like to ask a question, please just unmute yourself and please do.
So I've allowed you to unmute yourselves. Yes, you can try that.
And maybe we don't have any questions, which is also fine.
I have one, Raechel. Oh, you go, Mariana.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Raechel. I'm from Mexico. I'm going to be starting to work with a team. And there are there are three bosses, but they have to work together in a special project, and they are in conflict. I really haven't had first reunion with them, but would you suggest I am a mediator also. So usually I go first with each of the parts to understand what is the conflict in their point of view and what they need before I get them together. Would you recommend that approach?
Yes, Mariana, I think that's a great question, and what a really challenging and interesting situation that you face with that. I think for me the first thing that comes to mind is to understand the type of conflict they're facing into first, and I think that's what you're asking, is to have a think for yourself. Is it about the task, the process? Is it a status one? I think you said there's three bosses. That makes things tricky in terms of what's the status, or who do they think should be making decisions. So try and do that first, Mariana. If it is a personality conflict, I think therefore sometimes as a team coach we need to get them to talk that through using some good relationship building activities about having everyone, particularly the three of them, expressing what their aspirations are for the team and for the business and what it is that they're working on, and feeling heard, and then seeing if they can negotiate what that is together if they've all got different aspirations. So I'd start though with Mariana, try and figure out what type of conflict they are facing into, and then think about, as the coach, what can I get them to do? What's an activity or some questions that I can get them to ask themselves and put them into a discussion, and then try and help them manage that discussion so that they all feel as though they've had their say and that they are heard, and then moving towards some sort of action to help them keep growing and helping with facing into the tension that they are facing right now.
Thank you. Yeah, because what I found is that our needs, or the needs of the coaches, never fight each other. What fights is the position of I'm right and you're wrong. Mm-hmm. But at the end, we need to find out what is really the coachee needing in that situation, on that problematic, you know?
Yes, yeah. So yes, just get them, just all good discussions, Mariana, and hopefully try and use some of the things you've seen this morning, present it in front of them, talk about conflict, get them recognising and acknowledging it first and foremost.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. Suzanne, good morning.
Hi, Raechel. Sorry about that. My question is, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you've been brought in to coach a team where there is a high degree of conflict, and that is why you've been brought in? And so you are trying to go through all those kind of normal steps that you would as a team coach around, perhaps setting a team goal and a charter and all those types of things. What do you do in that situation where there's just a high degree of conflict to start with?
Yes. Thanks, Suze, for the question. I think particularly in our country here in New Zealand, I very rarely hear the word conflict, to be fair. Sometimes I think as team coaches we're brought in and the person who brings us in says it's either dysfunctional or the team's not working. They haven't even labelled it as conflict. And again, I'll err back to I think there is very little understanding on types of conflict. So what I like about that, Sue, is I can come and I'll just listen. Obviously we all interview the team members first before we do any team coaching, which I'm hoping everyone listening is nodding their head saying, yes, you would always meet with individual team members. And that's when you gather in your mind what is really happening here, and then you can start to put the category on it, tension or conflict in certain different areas. So, Suze, I work that out first. I try and understand, and is everyone experiencing it, or is this just one or two people who are experiencing it? And then try to set up my team coaching sessions to first acknowledge that and unpack it with the rest of the team, particularly if it's a whole thing, and then get them putting that word conflict into the discussion and showing them how we can leverage it, what's the strength behind the disagreement or the frustrations or even the dysfunction in the team. So if I actually think it's really quite dysfunctional, there's high levels of conflict, I'll often run a psychometric with the team. I do think Lencioni's 5, I call them the cohesions, not the dysfunctions. The cohesions of the team is a quick, it's easy. Teams tend to really love it, the data, and it's only 20 minutes to answer the questions. So those of you listening, I think that would be my favourite to run if you're thinking about how do I get people measuring where they might be in regards to cohesion or tension. It's just another word for dysfunction, isn't it? Yeah, so hopefully that sort of gives a wee bit of insight. Yes, those. Cool. Just going to check the chat. A few questions coming up on the chat. What's been my biggest challenge? Transforming conflict in progress with coaching. So that's from Maria. So Maria, great question. My biggest challenge in transforming conflict, Maria, always comes down to personality conflict. So I really enjoy the challenge of task, process, or even status conflict because I think a team can rationalise that, they can understand it, and they can use it to create strength in the team. So for me, the difficulty is when you have two people. I've even faced into two people fighting in a room together, like physically fighting, and I think those are the moments where you sometimes ask yourself the question, why do I do this? But once you face into it, is that scar tissue that you build up in yourself. It means you feel as though you can do more work in this space. So if you were thinking, Maria, what can we do to get better at that? For me, I've done a lot of study on personality conflict. There's a lot of psychological study done there. I think there are some good tools around helping two people to go through that conflict, to manage it for themselves, because of course we can't manage it. It's not for us to manage people's emotions or the conflict itself. It is just to get them to acknowledge and understand where they're at. How do they discuss things more openly? And then your backup also, of course, is to bring in a mediator. Bring in somebody who's a colleague who's really good at this. If you're not comfortable with doing it, that's when I always ask the permission of the leader of the team to say, hey, I'd like to get an associate in who may like to help these two people work through what's going on for them. Because, of course, two people in conflict can create a real disruption for the rest of the team. So that's my answer to that one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Claudia.
Hi, Raechel. This is very interesting. I think that dealing with team conflict is one of the best ways that we can help teams as team coaches. And have you been in a situation where the leader himself or herself was the one causing the conflict? In fact, was incentivizing the conflict in the team? How did you deal with that? Because I think that I think that's one of the hardest things that can happen in a team.
It is, isn't it, Claudia? A great question. And I think, when it is the leader, we also feel within ourselves, that is usually the leader who has brought us in to do the work. So what do we do in that scenario? So in some part of my mind, it says to me I don't treat them any differently than I would anyone else in the team, particularly if our role as the team coach has been to get them operating as a collective together. But when it is the leader, I tend to have a discussion with them. Claudia, I will acknowledge or observe that what is happening and give them some feedback. Just like I would do with anyone in the team if it is one person that tends to be causing a lot of the disruption or tension in the team. So it can be a challenging conversation to have, but of course, because as team coaches, we are also good one-on-one coaches. It is about asking them the right question. What are they observing about their impact on the team? And then, of course, the other thing I would have done is, because I have interviewed all the team members prior to the teamwork starting, I would have actually asked the question. One of my common questions in that scenario is, talk to me about your team leader. How is the relationship with them? What impact do they have in the team? I might have already had some insight into this earlier on anyway, and debriefed that with the team leader. So Claudia, the only time it doesn't work, the outcomes of it, is when the team leader isn't self-aware or does not want to change themselves. And I think as team coaches, we have to make a really tough decision of whether it is going to be the right sort of work to do if we have a team leader who's not willing to change. Thank goodness most of mine have said, yes, this has been really good and I feel as though I need to change. And so that works out really well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Now I've got something from Carla. So Carla, you've said, I often see leaders who don't consider conversation as taking action. They may not even recognise a conflict, rather they assume the other team or leader simply doesn't understand their point. This mindset creates a barrier to open communication. Yes, it does. And this kind of leaders are part of the culture, yes. So look, I think again, Carla, look, it's something that we face into when any one person in the team doesn't recognise the conflict. All I'm going to say on that one, Carla, is again, as a team coach, use the opportunity to do a conflict session, and I call these bringing heat into the room session. Once you've established, what's the purpose of the team, maybe some values or those ground rules, the psychological safety, you might have done that first. Think about a time or a situation where you feel as though the team is ready to talk about the dynamic and how discussion needs to shift from debate and just exchange of opinions into dialogue. So Carla, one of the things I find, or a tool I find really useful in this situation, is to help the team learn about the different types of talking we can do. There's some really lovely stuff online, just Google it, the difference between discussion, debate, decision-making and dialogue. And you might like to present that as a bit of a framework that you can work through as the team coach, and getting people to look at not the content of what they're saying, but the structure of how they are having a discussion. So I hope that helps, Carla, with your question that you had there. Right, we have a couple more questions if anyone would like. Thanks, Carla, for saying the thanks. If anyone else has a question, pop it in the chat. The thing I will just if there's any last questions, the last thing I will say is for those of you who have joined the webinar, and a lot of people I do team coach train, there is always a concern with, what do I do? What if it happens in the room, and what if I can't handle it? And how do I keep myself in a safe place? So I think first things first to consider is that as a team coach, you always have such marvellous courage. And I think that's something to remind yourself before you go into any room, because conflict can unpack in the moment, and it can be something that is a surprise to both yourself and anyone in the room. So just keep patting yourself on the back and understanding you have great courage in doing this work as a team coach. I think the other thing is also to be well prepared with what I've talked about this morning. I think if you can categorise in your mind first, where is the conflict coming from? I think that's a really great help to keep the emotion out of it. As I said, it helps to rationalise it. If you're feeling a bit unstuck, just pause the team and actually say, we need to figure out exactly what is playing out here. And you might like to put those types of conflict up on the board, particularly the top three, particularly if you've recognised it's like a task one or a process one. Just keeps you very much in the space of cooling the room down, getting them thinking, break them out into pairs or groups, get them chatting, so that then you can come back to the conflict that's playing out in a way where they feel as though they can talk about it a bit better, and that you have got yourself in a situation where you know what you're going to do with it. So all I'm probably saying here is that I hear you sitting there thinking, gosh, this is the most difficult thing to do sometimes, but you do have the toolbox to cope with it. And the idea is just to keep people talking about what's happening here. If done well, it'll lead to great progress. Okay, thank you everyone. It's been so wonderful to have you all here. And of course, you will be sent a recording if you would like to pick up on some of the techniques that I had on the screen there. And I look forward to seeing you at another webinar by the ICC sometime soon. Take care everyone. Bye for now.